morning, everyone, and welcome to BlackFutures, the Sankofa series, hosted by Humanities Amped with the help of our partners at Metromorphosis and the East Baton Rouge Parish School System. We are excited to share this event with you. Teachers, to share this event with students, we encourage you to log into Zoom through your computer. You can do this with your class meeting open and share the screen with your class through Google Meet. Another option is to watch this event through live stream at the Humanities Amped YouTube channel. Just search Humanities Amped YouTube and our channel should pop up. Encourage students to submit comments and questions through the chat or through this form, bit.ly/BR Black History. Again, that's no caps, bit.ly/BR Black History. We have an impactful and fun program for you today. But before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Brianna Collins, and I'm a proud McKinley High School graduate and Humanities Amped alumna. I attended Northwestern State University, where I majored in mass communications and minored in military science and English. I currently work as a television news producer at WAFB and serve in the United States Army Reserve. I now serve as a board member for Humanities Amped. I'm a member of the Action Committee for Dialogue on Race and will soon be training as a moderator for the organization. But that's enough about me. Let's get started. This year at Humanities Amped, we are celebrating the first of our 3 core values, beloved community. As we think about the issues going on in the world, this aspect of our organizational vision to nurture a community of lifelong learners and civic leaders has never been more important to our individual and collective well-being. Dr. Martin Luther King was known to talk about beloved community. When he talked about beloved community, he was talking about calling up the best in one another. Beloved community is a way to summon our strength and imagination so that we can work together to create our best collective futures. BlackFutures, the Sankofa series, is hosted in partnership with Metromorphosis because a celebration of Black history requires beloved community. Sankofa means revisiting the past for its usefulness. It's an African word from the Akan tribe in Ghana. The symbol of Sankofa is the bird that you will see throughout the program. The entire program encourages students to think about themselves as beneficiaries of ancestral knowledge, victories, and hope, which is why our events today will include 2 intergenerational dialogues and end with a fresh heat, the Griot edition, an art exhibition where students will have the chance to amplify their voice. But before we get started with the dialogue, we will set the stage by sharing this beautiful piece entitled My Freedom of Colors by Stephanie, a 7th grader at Park Forest Middle. Stephanie writes, "In my artwork, I portray the colorful dream for the unseen future. I use 2 of the most powerful figures in Black history, along with my ambition to create the best colorful dream in hopes to make it come true. To live in a world full of colors, diverse people, endless love, and respect that everyone deserves." Thank you so much for your art, Stephanie, your guidance, Ms. Hasten, and shout out to all the Raiders. So let's get started with our first event. In the spirit of Sankofa, we will have 2 dialogues featuring a young Baton Rouge leader and a civil rights elder. We will start our dialogue series with Maxine Crump and Myra Richardson. To prepare for this event, we have been reading the recently released report, Black Baton Rouge, Yesterday and Today. Looking back to effectively move forward. Written by Chris Tyson, Lori Martin, and published by our partner, Metromorphosis. Maxine Crump's legacy is highlighted in the article. The authors explain, Maxine Crump is the first Black female student to live in a dorm on Louisiana State University campus in the 1960s. Not only were Black Baton Rouge residents in South Baton Rouge excluded from attending games in Tiger Stadium, but Blacks were prohibited from attending the school or playing any of its athletic teams until the 1970s. Maxine was just getting started when she integrated the LSU dorms. Her career spans news, public relations, and media development. She was the first woman DJ at WXOK AM, the first Black DJ at WFM radio, and later the first Black reporter at WAFB TV. Her volunteer leadership on the YWCA Board of Directors, where she participated in the National YWCA Racial Justice Program, led to her developing the Dialogue on Race original series program, This ultimately led to the development of the Dialogue on Race Louisiana organization, where she continues to serve as the president and CEO. She has won numerous awards for her work to eliminate racism. In early 2016, she learned she was a descendant of enslaved people sold to Louisiana in an 1838 sale by Georgetown University, which was how she came to be born in Louisiana. We are here in the presence of a community elder who has paved a long and impressive path forward for us. Thank you for being here today, Ms. Maxine, and the work Maxine has done has paved the way for young trailblazing women like Myra Richardson. Myra Richardson is a lifelong civil servant, a native of Baton Rouge and a proud Baton Rouge High alumna. Growing up surrounded by adversity, she has been observant, potent, and impactful in her community. Myra is a local and nationally recognized leader, activist, and catalyst. 18 years of action have cultivated a passion for representing and standing with marginalized voices. Her engagements have ranged from her leadership role as Louisiana's ambassador for Women's March on Washington, to the creation of a local youth group, The Wave, and the co-creation of Justice X. She has embodied progressivism by seeking to create a more equitable future for Louisiana. In the Black Baton Rouge article mentioned earlier, Chris Tyson and Lori Martin assert that Black Baton Rouge residents experienced unequal treatment for centuries, but maintain the belief that change was possible. Maxine and Myra are living examples of the belief that change is possible, and we are so proud to have them here with us today. Throughout the dialogue, feel free to provide reactions and commentary in the chat and ask questions that we can respond to in the Q&A. If you're watching this live stream and can't access the chat, your questions on the Q&A form at bit.ly/Black History, no caps. Again, you can send those questions to the Q&A form at bit.ly/BR Black History. We want to hear from you, so please don't be shy. Questions and responses will be addressed at the end. Dr. West and Ms. Taylor Scott are in the chat, and they want to know what you think. Share your name, and if you're in class right now, tell us your school name too. Now I will pass the mic to Myra to start us off.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this intergenerational conversation. As Bree mentioned, there has been an amazing amount of work. We want to thank all of our sponsors. We want to thank everybody. We want to thank Asia. We want to thank Anna and everybody who's helped put this on. And it was definitely a community matter that made this possible. But we're going to talk a little bit about the work, and we're going to start a little bit about what Maxine has accomplished in her amazing life and how it has been so inspirational, not just to myself, but really to young women around Louisiana and around this country, and something that we can all aspire to, going into spaces where she might not have been welcomed, but making space for other people to enter those spaces and making them more diverse, making them more amenable. So Maxine, could you tell us a little bit about your experience while you were at LSU? She was the first Black woman to stay on LSU's campus. And during that time, that was a very tumultuous experience. So could you tell us a little bit about it now and what you think about youth organizers at LSU today?
Thank you, Myra. I'm very proud of you as well. And I'm amazed at what you've accomplished in such a short time. And I'm also very proud of Brianna, who has joined us at Dialogue on Race to work with us, and Anna and Destiny and Humanities Amped and everything that it has done, and how I've been connected with all of that all along is just amazing to me. And to talk about LSU as a key point, it's really hard for anyone to relate to what it was like for me on campus because of the fact that, well, unless we have it in a context of the times. I went to LSU because growing up, I heard my father say that Black people paid the taxes to keep LSU all white, and that wasn't right. And so always hearing that, when he came to me that summer, when the lawsuit had been filed and won, that forced LSU to open its undergraduate school to those who were of color. And I immediately said yes, because it made sense to me, because I'd always heard that, we pay taxes to go here. So I always knew I belonged at LSU or any other state school or any other business because my father would not support any business that discriminated against people who were Black. He would say they wouldn't get a dime of his money. And so he spent his money at places that were open and welcoming and gave full service to those who were Black, even in the midst of Jim Crow. So when I went to LSU, that summer was Freedom Summer. The civil rights law had passed, but the voting was still not open. And so there was the fight going on that summer, and it was led by people 18 years old, like I was at the time. And I knew my parents wasn't going to let me get out there and go to Mississippi and register voters. They just thought it was too dangerous for me, and I was their daughter. Not that I even asked, because I knew better. But I wanted to be a part of those teenagers that were making this movement. And so when I had the offer to go to LSU, I accepted that because I wanted to be a part of this change that my dad had always told me from the time I was 6 years old when I first asked him, what was this difference? Why do white people have this difference? So I asked very early. And he, as he explained to me, it wasn't constitutionally right. And I didn't know what Constitution, he says the Constitution is all Americans have the same rights. I didn't know what the Constitution was, but I knew that I saw he took the time to explain to me that my rights was that of an American. And as a 6-year-old would respond, my response was, so I'm an American? And he said, yes. And that moment made me know that I belonged anywhere in this country that an American belonged. So when I went on campus, I didn't go as a nervous person because I knew that James Meredith had been beaten trying to get into Mississippi University. So I wasn't afraid of any of that. None of that happened. LSU knew how to stay very benign. And so there was no tumultuousness actually going on campus. So everything moved almost appearing as normal, but it wasn't normal. But the dorm that I lived in was a very small dorm, and the students there were, it seems like LSU had planned it. I had a private room, and the students there were mostly art students, theater students in that type of study. And they came from parts of the country that had been familiar with desegregated schools. So I was no surprise to them. So I did well in the dorm. And so living in women's housing worked very well for me under the circumstances, but you have to be in the context of that time. And so Myra, you, I'm called a legend for having done that. That's not nearly as heroic as the things you've done, and you started out so young. What did you see that led you to want to say, I'm going to step into these roles? I need to be the one doing this type of activism, because yours was not just moving into a women's dorm. Yours has been very frontline active. So I'd like to hear from you on that.
So my journey, I think I was always intrinsically a leader and always intrinsically like just very altruistic, and I wanted to see the best for our worlds. And then growing up in 7805, growing up in North Baton Rouge, I just saw the conditions that our community was in, and it always propelled me to advocate for more, to see that there was more, to have to bus out of my community near Plank Road off of a street named Dayton Street in Dixie, and then to go to McKinley Middle and get on the interstate and see how vastly different the community changed, or to go even further to Baton Rouge High and see what Government Street was comparatively to Plank Road, and just see that level of disinvestment. Even as a child, you can internalize and notice that something was different. But I think my catalytic moment was in 2016 after Alton Sterling was murdered. It was July, the day that he died, or was murdered in plain blood. And this is the day after 4th of July. It's supposed to be a very patriotic day. And the next day you see a Black man being murdered because he was selling CDs. And I think that the privilege in it was going to Baton Rouge High and being surrounded by so many people who were very like-minded, being in organizations where everybody was saying, like, what resources are we pulling together to do that? And it truly started with a Twitter thread, right? So people are on social media, so like they're vocalizing their outrage. And I'm like, okay, well, we could tweet about it, but what are we going to do about it? And from there, hundreds and thousands of people replied. We saw our Greek organizations tap in. We saw people fly from around the country. We got support from the Obama administration. There was just an amazing amount of people, and it was almost transcendent. The day of, it was July 10th. So we had literally 5 days to plan this massive march to make sure that, our youth organizers who were being threatened by, anti-terrorist organizations and KKK and things like this. So like, we're all being told this, and our parents are like, well, I don't know if y'all want to try to do that. So, at the same time, like, we're battling, like, what is safe for our other community members. And even in Louisiana, we thought it was going to rain, and God did, he held up for us, and it didn't rain that day. But we ended up leaving nearly 10,000 people to Louisiana State Capitol. We were able to release demands. And that has been a policy fight that we've been working on still to this day. And some of those things have been wins, and some of them have been stagnant. But it has been a tremendous learning lesson. Even now in 2020. So at the time when that original march happened, I was 17 years old, and now I'm 22. And last year, we saw George Floyd, we saw Ahmaud Arbery, and I got to lead marches again last year, but this time in a different capacity. While I was still leading them, I saw students who were very much in the same position that I was. They were 17 and 16 and 15 trying to figure it out. They were coming from all of these different schools saying, like, what do we do? How do we make it happen? And it was almost like, a little bit like, it was crazy because I had to be now the responsible person and saying, hey guys, maybe y'all shouldn't just go march. Maybe y'all need to do a little planning, or maybe we need to have some logistics. So it was very surreal for me. And then, we definitely had more intentionality this time. I think some of the mistakes that I made in 2016, I was able to overcome them. And I built, tremendous amounts of relationships with our city leaders, with our state leaders, and was able to make succinct demands and be able to say, directly who's responsible for what branch of government does this. Our demands shouldn't be superficial. So how do we have something that is transformative? So, I always tell people that activism isn't just marches. It's not just policy, right? It is being the first Black woman in a women's dormitory. It is, going and pursuing your education. Like, activism manifests in how you invest in yourself and how you change your community. So I definitely think that the work that you've done, and I want to pivot a little bit back to you, like dialogue on race, those conversations, those are transformative conversations that has made my work a little bit easier over the last few years because more people are receptive to it. So I want to ask you a specific question. When the 1619 report came out by the New York Times, there were conversations across the world, and people said, should students have access to 1619, and should they even have conversations? So from your perspective as a, professional extraordinaire of conversations and groundbreaking, just barrier breaking work, do you think that our students should be watching 1619? At what age do you think they should start having these conversations? Because obviously youth activism has no bounds. We see Greta fighting for climate change across the world, and she's extremely young. So what age do you think we should allow students to activate their voice?
At the age they are aware of it and ask questions. Just like you saw your community, and that once you saw it and recognized it, whatever age you were then, it needs to be talked about. Nothing needs to ever be pushed aside. Children are centers of universal intelligence. They are not blanks that we fill in. They come here with an alive, active intelligence operating in them. And we should honor them and respect where they are. And whatever concerns they have need to be addressed, and they need to be able to speak openly and honestly about whatever they see. And this thing of saying you'll know when you get older isn't enough. There are things they will know when they get older, but isn't enough. Just like at 6, when I asked my father about the church we went to was segregated, and people who were white sat on one side, people who were Black sat on the other side, and often those who were white did not even speak to us. So I asked my dad in that language, why don't white people speak to colored people? In the 50s, they referred to colored people. I came of age in the 50s. So in that case, I could see his struggle in trying to put the words together to explain it to a 6-year-old, but he did not speak to me as if I was 6 years old. He spoke to me, he used a language that could reach me, but he didn't treat me like you're just a kid. And so that mattered to me. In fact, my dad always called me his daughter. He never called me his little kid or his little princess or none of those things. He always referred to me as his daughter. So he always honored the core of me, which meant I could grow into the space he was making for me. So I think that that children need to be honored as fully human, fully alive, fully awake, and fully intelligent at the level they show up. And I mean, who did that for you? Somehow, someone must have helped you have a voice.
I definitely think, and people always ask me, what are the 3 factors that like make a youth leader, or like what make this possible, or how do we keep duplicating it? And I always tell people mentorship was one of the most powerful things in my life. I had an enormous amount of educators who saw something in me and they poured into me. I've had mentors over the year. I've had you on my side. I've had so many people pour into me and continue this road and this pathway, Pastor Judson, everybody. There's just so many people who step up. And I think like that's what creates community. It really does truly take a village. And the other 2 components I say that make a youth leader is access to beautiful literature, right? You might not be able to travel the world just yet, but you can read a book. You can open the pages and see different life experiences. You can explore different religions. You can open your mind. And I think that has really, that's what made me the most empathetic. That's what made me the leader I am, being able to explore different places of our country, other countries, just being able to empathize with storylines and develop in who I am today. And then I think the last component is exposure. I think exposure is so important, especially for students here in Baton Rouge in Louisiana, where we're 50th in the country. And statistically speaking, most students never leave Baton Rouge. They've never been to New Orleans, or they've never left the state or gotten on a plane. So when we talk about access and we talk about equity, it's really about exposure and opportunity. How many opportunities are we granting to our children? Are we giving them the space to even think about these conversations when we're limiting to say the only way that you can make, financial stability for your future family is by working in a plant? So, when we talk about those conversations, when we talk about how we expand and what does equity and opportunity look like, we have to allow our students to grow and to be as your father allowed you. So I think it's so beautiful when we talk about those 3 components and how youth leaders have been coming up. It's truly about opportunity and space. So I definitely think you're right. It is about mentorship. It is about who pours into you. But I want to pivot a little bit and I want to talk about who inspired you, who helped you cultivate your pathway towards dialogue on race and all of the transcendent work that you have done. And I think a lot of it is you have been very public with your self-exploration, and that has been a gift to our entire community, is seeing how you have navigated throughout all of this and done it in such a public manner.
Well, it's like you said, it's what those opportunities are. And it's quite an opportunity to learn at 6 years old as a Black girl that you belong here. I don't know that people think that they need to answer that for their child. And maybe they don't know when they're answering it. But I think if you're honest with them, whatever you answer is going to work. Because I think my father struggled to give that answer. He wasn't sure. I mean, I was his first daughter. He had a son younger than me who had not asked that question. So it was the first time he had encountered being a father. He was a very young man. But I could see that he knew I believed in him and he didn't want to let me down. Both my parents, my mother also, like many of the things that I did with my brother. Like if my brother went in the woods with my dad hunting, I wanted to go. And I threw a fit if I couldn't go, and my dad would take me. And so my mother didn't object to me doing things that they didn't have boy things and girl things. So she just allowed me. And she would say to me things like, because girls wore dresses then, very rarely did they wear pants. I did, but when I was in a dress, she would say, well, when you sit down, you want to smooth your dress when you sit down, so there won't be wrinkled when you stand up. So she told me girl things, but she never forced me to do girl things. And so I didn't have a confusion. I could be fully me. And I got guidance from her, not rules, not shaming. And so it was that. And then my grandmother, I spent summers with my grandmother, and she never told me who I should be. I knew that when I went to my grandmother, I was going to be fully loved and could be fully me. I didn't have to, she didn't ask me what my grades were in school. She just loved me just as I was. And she called me babe. No one has called me babe since then. It's just my grandmother. which I love because it was my grandmother's name for me. So it was the security of knowing that I was loved. Then that led me to choose mentors. And so I started to observe people that I admired, and I would emulate what they were like or what they did that I liked until I found the place in me that drew that forward. I found that mentors don't really, in a sense, pour into you. They draw the authentic you forward in a way that you have your own identity. It's not theirs, it's yours. That's the best thing, is when I really fully continue to develop into my authentic self.
Awesome, awesome. So I'm looking at a few of the questions in the panel, and we'll be getting to those in a few minutes. But I want to ask Maxine one more juicy question. So, there has been so much that has happened in our community over the last few years, not just 2016, but even historically, Baton Rouge being home to the first boycott that would later inspire MLK. There's just so much historical events and things that have happened in our community that aren't told. And I think a lot of that is about having access to that information. And that's something that you and your organization have been very good about, is informing people so that they can now have conversations and then make more concerted efforts to be engaged in their community. But one important quote that I heard from both you and Donnie Rose is the power of words. And if everybody has the same foundational verbiage and definitions, then they can have more powerful conversations, because more often than not, we don't have the same starting point. So to you, why is it so important for us all to have the same starting point and access to information in our community so that we can have a more, comprehensive and collective conversation?
Yes, I agree with Donnie. Words do matter, and words can hurt and words can heal. But having a common language, in dialogue, we don't require anyone to agree with the language we use, but we let them know that this is what we're talking about when we say this. In the 6 sessions of the original series, people often lead using our language. And I think a lot has to do with the fact that we don't tell them that they must use it. But putting it out there and being clear about what you're saying and what you mean and how you define your terms helps people build their own agreement to use those terms. Because we are in a structured narrative in this society that has structured for us. We got called up on our pre and post survey. In the survey, the term Blacks had been used. And one of the people taking the survey said, that's offensive. And I was so grateful to that participant. So we went back and we eliminated that, and we would say Black people, not just Blacks. And so language matters, and we don't choose to use offensive language. We understand that people could be offended by a language that isn't offensive. That's a different responsibility, and it's not the responsibility of those offering the language. If someone chooses to be offended, it does not mean that they have been offended. But in this case, that was reasonable and acceptable. We are about open, honest, and courageous conversation. And in order to have that, we have to use the language that speaks and is clear enough so that people can join that language, so that we can change this structured narrative that has kept us all using words that's useless in making change. In fact, it keeps the status quo. And when I worked with you we had the race and policing dialogue, which we're going to have again, that was how I met you. They recommended to me that you needed to be on the dialogue. And that was in 2016?
Mm-hmm. I think that was 2018. That was 2018.
2018, that's right, 2018. And you, in the moment you hit the room, you turned heads with everybody in that room. They had full respect for you, and these were all established professionals. And you stood in there clearly, and you called things by their proper name without any holdback. In facing people who are already established and think they know, what leads you to see your place in knowing that you have a voice in there as well?
I definitely attributed a lot to my mother. I think it was just a lot of, even just like the way I shaped my advocacy and the things that I read. I just always read about heroines, and they were always very audacious. They were always very bold. One of my personal idols is Shirley Chisholm, right? So she was like the first Black woman, everything, like she was coming in and she was smashing things. So, it's the same decade that MLK and Malcolm X are assassinated, and this woman is running for president, so she is killing it. And I just, she's the first Congresswoman there. So there were all of these firsts for her. And it was the thing that she said last, that she wanted to be remembered as somebody who was ballsy. Like she wanted to be remembered as somebody who, made space for herself. And that was something that really spoke over my life, is that, and I tell all of my younger mentees, and I tell women and young men, is that you deserve to be in every room you enter. You deserve to have space. And I think a lot of it is even like being very introspective, right? So like my entire life's journey has been on, not on hold, but has been very public for the last few years. Your whole life was. So I think you definitely understand like how taxing it could be to be in the public eye for so long. But what I will say is that introspectiveness allowed me to like dig deep into like imposter syndrome, right? So like, what is that? That is being in spaces and having, like some self-doubt, saying like, do I belong in those spaces? So it was a lot of conquering that and saying like, no, I deserve to be in these spaces. I do deserve these opportunities. I am worthy of these things. And I think every child in this district is deserving of opportunities, deserving of access. If you want to be mayor, if you want to be a doctor, if you just want to be the best patty flipper at Burger King, I want you to do that. So I think that we just all are afforded dreams and we should pursue them. And my dream is to make an impactful and substantive change in my community. So that's what I intend to do every day that I step out. So when you enter those spaces, I think that you do owe it to yourself. You owe it to your community to find the best version of yourself every day.
And that's definitely something that you're doing so young. It's like you do own your space. And what I heard you say is that doesn't always feel comfortable. And you're not always feeling the confidence that is there. But you go into that deep introspection, which is that center of your intelligence, and you find your connection again and you bring it back out. And that's a lot of things. Sometimes what I learned when I had people who were mentoring was how to find out how they became what I'm admiring. And I found that it's from their internal core, which led me to find my own core. And I love, you said we're M&M, and that's so true, because we really have similar paths in the way that we do this, and we have similar ways that we go inside and bring it out a lot. We learn the learning to depend on your inner core is one of the most valuable things I think we've said, because people think it's just only to emulate what they see on the outside. But you've got to have that center that belongs to you that you can always draw on for this wonderful work that we do.
And speaking of drawing on things, in Baton Rouge, despite us making all of this progression, all of this work, there are still so many silos in our community. There's egos, and sometimes it makes it a little bit harder to get the work done. And, you and I personally fight these fights every day. There's so many people who are in this conversation that know how hard it is sometimes to get change, because we're fighting systemic issues, right? It's not just about a person who is in a position for 4 or 8 years. It's about the systemic root cause of some of these issues that make our community operate the way it does. And dialogue on race has been a ground zero for a lot of those conversations where people could leave their ego at the door, and they can have some of those, those conversations that say, hey, how are we all collectively in the same vehicle if we all have the same goal to get to the same location? So as we talk about how we move our community forward and having conversations, what do you see for the future of Baton Rouge, with you seeing how audacious our young activists have been? And I know you're also proud of them, because you've spoken to me after every march and made sure that we were all fine. But how do we start to eliminate those silos through conversations? And how do we, move Baton Rouge forward collectively? I think that it's so much about collaboration right now instead of competition. And I think that is, even when we talk about diversity and representation in conversations, we talk about that on a level of age, of geographic location, of not just sex, because I don't think we should just limit it anymore to just race, or saying that, diversity looks like this, right? It's definitely expanding our mind of what diversity looks like and having representation in every space when we're having these conversations.
We are becoming more collaborative in our work here in Baton Rouge. And I think that's nationwide. And so often things that are happening good like that nationwide doesn't seem to be happening in Baton Rouge. But from where I sit, it's happening in Baton Rouge too. I know we have such a strong pull the other way for people who just, someone was talking to me last night, in a store, and they said, "Oh, your work must be really increasing right now." And I said, "Yes, it is." And so another guy walked over to me and said, "What is your work?" And then I said, "It's Dialogue on Race Louisiana." He said, "What does it do?" And I said, "Well, we have conversations around race. People come to learn how to talk about race." He said, "I can't wrap my head around that." So we have a lot of people like that in Baton Rouge who cannot wrap their head around a conversation, or cannot even think about the uncomfortableness that they would put themselves into to have these conversations. But the thing is, this is part of what is happening in Baton Rouge. At the same time, we're having this great collaboration. So I think that from where I sit and where I've been, this collaboration level is high enough to where that is going to become mainstream here.
Right. And we're definitely having growing pains. But I think when we talk about growth and we talk about progress, it is moving inch by inch. And I think even our failures are a moment of progress, because it means that we aren't where we previously were. But we're going to go ahead and throw it to Ms. Collins, as she's going to lead us into the next part of this conversation. Thank you so much, Maxine, for this amazing conversation. I know everybody's excited in the comments right now.
Thank you too,
You guys,
Myra.
thank you so much for such an amazing dialogue. I was sitting and I was thinking about when you said the people who motivated you and who guided you into doing this. And I was thinking about Humanities Amped, because that is where I really was pulled into activism. I didn't get that same type of love and the same type of push. Like, I love, I'm sorry, I didn't get that push to activism at home, but through Humanities Amped, they opened the doors to so many different things in so many different places, which goes back to that beloved community. But now we're going to take some questions. Thank you guys for that engaging conversation. We want to give other people a chance to respond to some of the comments and questions from the audience. It's not too late to send in your thoughts and questions. We want to hear from you all. So send in your thoughts through the chat or through bit.ly/BR Black History Forum. So we're going to kick off with Kennedy from Liberty High. And she asks both of you, what does Black history mean to you?
Right. So Black history for me, I think that we've kind of gotten into this like interesting new space where people are like battling between Black history being something that feels really far away, like it was just the civil rights movement, because we see pictures in black and white, when in actuality, it wasn't that long ago, right? And then we talk about like how Black history is consistently being made right now as we're all sitting here. We have so many firsts that are continuously happening. Like we have our first Black mayor, that was just, 4 years ago. We have all of these amazing people who are making firsts around the country. So I think Black history it's not a vacuum, it's a continuum, right? It is always evolving, and there's so many firsts. And it's unfortunate that we're just breaking some of these grounds and some of these ceilings, but the beauty of it is how much progress and how much potential I think that our community has been able to do, that we thrive no matter what circumstance that we're in. And I think that to me is one of the most powerful circumstances, and that is what pushes me every day, that I make Black history, you make Black history, that there is no limit to what we achieve. It's not something that happened so long ago or it was decades ago. It's something that is happening right now, every minute of every day. There are Black companies and corporations, there are entities, there are organizations that are starting that are making history. And I'm so blessed to be able to see it with my own eyes. That it's not just something that I saw in a book that might have only told a portion of the story, but not have told the entire lived experience. So to be a part of that and to see it, I think is beautiful to me. Black history is beautiful.
Definitely.
Well,
Thank you, Myra.
Black history to me is the 400 years back to 1619, that the history of those who built the country with their labor and many other talents have been left out of American history. And Black history is that history that's been left out of America, that the great history of those people who built this country, to complete America's history must be told. The authentic history of America needs to include the history of those people that were left out. And as you start looking at how much history was left out and how much contribution African Americans have made to this country, it's staggering, and it needs to be included. And I think that's why the controversy of separating it out is going on. But I think that controversy is going to lead to a full American history that will include African American history. And as Myra said, as is it before the world, what contribution African Americans are already making to America now will make seeing it in the books the new norm, because then the old norm has been that this is a white country, and this cannot be a white country with the diversity, the real diversity that we have here. It is who we are, and it needs to be shown that way.
Thank you guys both for your answers. The next question is from Haven, also from Liberty High. Do you think that freedom will be an everlasting battle?
Freedom
Maxine,
for freedom. I think they're referring to freedom around race.
Yes, ma'am.
Then no, it will not be an everlasting problem. When this country realizes, at the level it needs to realize, that that's why we do dialogue, because most people think race is real and it's a made-up construct. There's only one race, and America has made up these different levels and rankings, and white as preferred. When that is eliminated in this country, and it can be, because it is not in people's hearts and minds, it was constructed through laws, policies, and practices. And when that is eliminated, then we will not have to fight for freedom to be full Americans. So open access to everyone, when that's done for real, no, we won't be fighting for freedom. Maybe other kinds of freedom, but not for the right to be an American.
Awesome. So I definitely think that freedom, it's a very, it's a lofty term, right? Like, I think freedom is one of those things that people strive for. And I do think in America, like the value that we'll all be American, like that is definitely an attainable goal. But I think when we talk about freedom on the grander scale, like I think that humanity shows us, like just on a historical, like the entire comprehensive, that humanity has always had this pervasive like way to kind of like find something to pit people against each other, right? So that is something that's going to be an enduring problem throughout humanity. So I think it's what we do individually, what decision you make every day, to not just make freedom for yourself, but to make freedom for those around you. It's the conscious decisions and the biases that you don't put on or project onto other people. So it's every day saying, how do you choose kindness towards the people around you? Because freedom, while it might evolve and, there might be more equality and equity for Black and brown people, it could, then go towards, sexism, right? It might be like, how are we now uplifting women? How are we uplifting different versions and different communities that we previously have, even disabled people and things of that nature? How are we honoring those communities? So freedom is something that is also a continuum. It's something that we have to continuously work out every day. So I think it's definitely on the individual decision. How are you making the world a more equitable place? And if we all had that conversation, if we all woke up every day and said, what am I doing to push the collective goal forward? Then I definitely think we'll be in a more positive position. But I don't want us to think that, like, oh, it's all going to be fixed tomorrow, because there's always going to be work and activism and things to fight for in our community. And I just think about how passionate and being, disciplined, like how willing are you to contribute to the fight, and how are you going to continue to show up? And the most powerful thing you can do is show up.
Yes, thank you. So our next question is from Bri'Yonna from Liberty High, and she says, how can young people get involved?
So when I first, my first piece of activism wasn't in 2016 with Alton Sterling, right? So I think it was me seeing things that maybe I didn't like in my school leadership. It was me saying, yes, I can identify a problem. And sometimes what you'll notice in structures is maybe, your teachers are maybe adults, right? Like there's a level of ageism, right? So there's like discounting your opinion or your thoughts because you can't exactly articulate them. So what I got really good about is I wanted to be the most articulate and the most knowledgeable about whatever subject matter I was passionate about, so that no one could refute that, oh, it was just because you're 12, you can't think something. No, I read about it. I brought you the paper that said this, and I researched the person who wrote it. So I think it's about how informed are you, or how passionate about you, right? If you didn't want to stand up for the pledge, why didn't you want to stand up for the pledge? What's the historical legacy for it? What does it really mean besides, oh, I just don't want to stand because it's a social trend right now, right? So I had to go beyond how I felt in that moment and say, like, how do I dig deep about the causes that I'm passionate about? And then once I started digging deep, I was like, oh, I'm not as passionate about this cause, but this one, I could read it for hours on hours about this. I can pour my soul into this, and I know that this is something that deeply impacts me. Or for example, my sister, she had dyslexia, so I definitely wanted to fight for like education and equity and make sure that she was getting her 504 and things like that for her community. So, there's things, it's about what you're passionate about. And if you're going to be passionate about it, you obviously want to do some research into it. You obviously want to engage. So youth activism is not just protest, right? It's about finding what you care about. It's about what you're passionate about. It's about you honing in on who you are as a person. That's what youth activism is. It's finding your true personality. It's exploring who you are. It's reflecting on things that hurt your feelings and saying like, wow, this really hurt my feelings. Why? So I think it's basically being introspective. It's asking questions. And when you start asking questions, that's the most powerful thing that you can do, especially in America, especially in this world.
Questions are very powerful. That is true indeed. What I say to young people is, what are you interested in? Whatever your focus and your interest, you heard Myra and I talk about, we followed our interest. And so, and there are two layers, either get involved with what's already going on or create what's missing that you think needs to happen. I saw that a language for talking about race was missing, and I developed the Dialogue on Race series. So getting involved is one way to just join something that's already going on, which is great. And also to develop something that maybe someone tell you can't do. Both Myra and I can say we've done things that people told us, this isn't gonna work, you can't do it. Believe that inner self that tells you, that keeps pulling you forward with that.
Thank you. So the next question says, what do you guys think about women, especially Black women, going into politics?
Oh, that's my damn. You know, I think when you prioritize the most oppressed, right? So when you lead from the bottom, that means you're now prioritizing the person who has experienced the most amount of trauma, that has experienced the most amount of problems and the systemic issues. So obviously, you know, if you were at the top and you were more privileged, you wouldn't be able to advocate for somebody you've never understood their life experience versus somebody who now has experienced all of these varying different things, which I think makes them a better and more, you know, they're more experienced leaders through their life experience. So I'm always a proponent of a good Black woman running. You know, I believe women belong in the House and the Senate. So I'm totally for that. I would donate to your campaign. I definitely think that, you know, the person is political. So I understand that we shouldn't politicize. This is a nonprofit organization, so these are my own independent views. But I definitely think that, you know, the person is political, that everything you do, the decisions that you make, they all start from politics, right? So it's how long your bus ride is, it's what the cost of food is, it's gas, it's why your mom is working every day for this week and she's only making $7.25 an hour, which is not a livable wage. So, you know, everything, when we see things happening on a national level, you really have to think about what's local, the people that are right in front of you. It's not just your mayor, right? It's, you need to go investigate who your Metro Council is. You definitely need to go investigate who your DA is, right? It's not just the police officers who you see on the front end and see every day, right? It's judges who also make those decisions. Right now, we just in this past election season elected the most Black women in any race, you know, and all of those Black women are now sitting on the bench. We had races where they had 10 and 15 Black women running, and that was the most beautiful. I mean, I was a little tired because I was working those races, but, you know, it's beautiful to see that we are now in a time in society where we're honoring Black women, where we're saying that you deserve to lead. And I think when we talk about that, that is one of the most beautiful things that you can do, is to see a Black woman elected. That's my stuff right there.
I think the voice of women belong in the leadership of government. We must have their voices there.
Thank you. So the next question is from Dominion from Liberty High. Have y'all ever faced any strong opposition for what you were doing that made it difficult and really raise the stakes?
So I think it was in 2016, and mind you, I was 17 at this time, and like we had got like a random call. So mind you, my friends, I was the oldest at that time, so I was 17. So my friends who I was also organizing with, they were 15, 14, 17, like we're all in high school, like they're freshmen, and I was the highest when I was a junior about to become a senior. And you know, our parents were scared because we were getting called from like the KKK. We were getting calls from like random people who were just so upset that we were about to protest. And you know, essentially we did have a peaceful protest. We were able to mobilize almost 10,000 people to move from one point to another point, deliver our demands. It was largely peaceful. And at the end of it, it was definitely escalated due to some levels of violence, but we moved all the kids and all those different things. So, you know, it was very dangerous. You know, we saw, you know, SWAT members up on buildings with like guns and helicopters flying around. And mind you, you know, this Baton Rouge. So we like, what's going on? They had tanks and all this other stuff. And then even towards last summer, they were also again 15, 16, 17, and now I'm 21 at that time. And I'm helping them navigate this. And we had one of their parents park across the street from where we were organizing. And they had like an anti-protester. They broke the window and threw a brick into the mom's car. So, and they left a note, and it was just this really weird incident. So, even in today's times, when we talk about, people aren't necessarily being lynched, but, we have modern day slavery. We have our prison system. We have redlining. We have things where in redlining, for the young students who are watching. So redlining is essentially when they cut districts basically based on population or race, right? So like Black people in Louisiana, we're not the majority per se, right? But in the city of Baton Rouge, we're nearly over 50%. So like they might cut Baton Rouge as a predominantly Black district, but the rest of Louisiana might be like a different race. So therefore we have a smaller district. So, there are systemic ways in we're being oppressed, and there's systemic issue that I am fighting against. So of course, if you're fighting against a system, they're going to bring down the entire power of a system versus me just fighting one person. So I think that it's never about, I don't necessarily allow the risk to stop me from doing my work, because my work isn't about me, right? Like I do everything that I do. I believe that the seed that you plant today, you shouldn't see your full tree tomorrow, right? I believe that anything that I do today is for my grandchildren. Like my grandchildren, they should only be worried about like climate change. That's it. College should be free already. Food access and equity should be solved, and they should be worried about climate change. That's how I feel personally.
As far as I will talk about one thing. When I started the dialogue on race, when I was just in the process of developing it, you wouldn't believe, this was in the 90s. I'm sure before a lot of you were born, but nonetheless, people said, racism has been solved. We have a civil rights law. And the pushback went from there, continued from there. But no matter the pushback, like Myra, I could see with my own eyes that the barriers were there, because I had learned institutional racism. The language had been changed to let's all get along. So people noticed that people was hiring the first Black person here and celebrating that. And here we are 400 years later, and it's a celebration to have a Black person in position. Something was wrong with that. So those were the things that I thought we need to get an education on what's really going on. And it was a pushback from all levels, not just some people, not just institutions, all levels, from family all the way to the highest institution was pushing back on it. But I saw something, and I didn't fight and argue about it. I would sit in the room and listen to it and say nothing. And they realized they were the only ones talking. And when they finished, they'd run out of everything they were going to say. Then they would look at me and say, do you have anything you want to say? And I said, well, wherever they'll let us have this conversation, that's where we'll go.
Well,
nothing else.
I want to say one more thing on what Maxine just said. And this was my first dialogue on race conversation, actually. And it was about Obama. And it was basically talking about how America had essentially said, because we elected a Black man, that we were now in this colorblind society. So colorblind basically means that, you might be a person of privilege or somebody who's white, and you say that you no longer see like color, right? Like you just value everybody for what they are individually, but there is power to seeing me and understanding my struggles and understanding that it's not just me saying that like, oh, I'm going to pick myself up by the bootstraps, or I'm going to do and achieve all these amazing things. No, there are still systemic issues that say that we don't start on the same level, that we do not have the same resources. We do not come from the same community, that I deserve to have access. And sometimes in some cases, I might need a little extra help to get to where I need to go so that we can have the same opportunity. But more so in that conversation, it was saying that how do we collectively move forward, right? Like, how do you value what I am? And there was a lot of pushback at that time because, we had Obama. So that means that, we were where we were supposed to be in America, and that we had reached a turning point and only to elect Trump, in 2000, what was that? Into whatever year that was. So then we elected Trump.
16.
That was 16. And we elected Trump. And then we saw what just happened at the Capitol a few weeks ago. So that says we obviously are not in the colorblind society. We obviously have work to do in this community. The last 4 years were proof of that there are systemic, long, enduring issues in our community. And at the end of the day, racism is not something that, it just pops up, right? It's something that is taught. So how are we deconstructing that in our community? That is the biggest fight, is unlearning the things that make our community the way it is so that we can become what we need to be.
Thank you, guys. That was beautiful. So Miss A's class from Baylor High School asked Myra, what has been your most ecstatic moment of getting activated, and what has been your most disappointing moment, and why?
I don't think I really have like a high point, because activism is actually really stressful. It's like really like, you're like, I like cry like that whole week. There's nothing fun about organizing marches. There's no like aha moment, right? Like afterwards, you're more like relieved, like, okay, nothing bad happened. You know, it's more like about safety. But I think organizing is seeing what I'm fighting for move from protest to policy, right? Like seeing substantive change, seeing like those types of wins. And, you know, I've been able to win hundreds of awards over the last 5 years I've been doing this work, but does any of that help the people in my community? So I think the wins that directly impact my community, being able to set aside my ego, like every time that I personally like recognize that, okay, I put my ego aside because this is the greater good, that's a personal win for me. So that's what makes me ecstatic about my personal activism, is like being able to deprioritize my ego and then prioritize people, right? How do I put people first? And I think my saddest moment, I had a sad moment just yesterday. So I was fighting for a grocery store in our community, and my measure, and because I was sitting on boards in North Baton Rouge, and I had a board meeting. And essentially I was trying to get a grocery store in Scotlandville, in the Scotlandville community, and the measure failed, right? I was discouraged nonetheless, but you know, 3 hours later, I was researching how to like go back to the table and present to my board and get some more funding, right? Like, so it's about every day, how did I show up? That is kind of like how I personally view it. It's like every day you have an opportunity to say, what is your impact? What is your writing going to be on the wall when you leave this earth? And I want what's written about me to say that I was at least engaged, that I at least said something, that I at least moved the needle a little bit, right? Even if it's just a drop in the ocean, I was there. Like I did something for my community and I was a part of the fight. And I think about, you know, Martin Luther King's quote, and we talk about, you know, how some people, the people who stand on the sidelines, the people who, you know, say that they're allies, those are the worst type of people, the people that tell you to wait for change, the people who tell you to hold up and, oh, just give us some more time. I don't do that. I would never tell a young person to wait. The time is now. You know, government works slowly, but if we all collectively were saying the same thing, when you unite your voices, and I tell young people, like the most powerful time to organize is when you're in high school. You'll never be around thousands of your friends again. Even in college, it's harder to meet people, it's harder to niche. So when we talk about why activism is so powerful when you're young, it's because you have hundreds of your peers at your youth at one point in time, versus when you're in college, you know, you might just have your sorority or your fraternity or your group of friends. When you become an adult, you age, now you could lose your job, you know, there's all these other different things. So when we talk about like youth activism, like my favorite thing was just seeing massive people collectively move on one issue and say that despite how we all might have different views, we all collectively agree that Black Lives Matter. We all collectively agree that we can push our community forward if we did these two things. So I think that's the most ecstatic thing for me, is like knowing that like our youth are the future. And I tell people that in Louisiana, we have oil and gas and we have all of these resources, but our most important resource in Louisiana is our people. It's our children, for sure.
Thank you, Myra. Definitely, I want to reiterate what you said. The time is now. So the next question is for both Maxine and Myra. It's from Sage from Liberty High, and she says, how do you think Baton Rouge can incorporate more of the Black culture or more of history that is heard? It's not taught in history books or barely spoke upon.
In Dialogue on Race, we're going to be working with the school system to talk about how to add authentic history in the teaching. And I think that what Myra said, that center of movement happens in high school, that center of learning where you develop your core values and your core understanding of the life you're moving out can happen at school. And I think as textbooks start to incorporate the more authentic history, then that change will happen for young people, because it's great to get it at the school level, K through 12.
I think that right now, Baton Rouge, I definitely want to commend the mayor's office. I definitely want to commend like all of the like Metromorphosis. There are so many organizations that are doing an amazing job of storytelling, right? Like I think that over the years that we've done injustice of not accurately storytelling our history, especially in the city of Baton Rouge. You see communities like in Alabama where they have, civil rights trails and these things that they generate tourism. There are things that, they have like the Black business directory, and they're saying like, these are all the businesses that you should be visiting while you're here. So I think that there's a marketing moment as well as a economic driver opportunity for us to say, even if you live here, right, how many Black businesses are you frequenting every day, right? Like those businesses tell stories. There are businesses that have evolved over the years. One of my personal clients, because I own a consulting firm, he owned a snowball stand in the 60s and now it's been reprised as a restaurant and he's still a part of it, decades later. Those are stories that have to be told. So I think, the biggest thing that we can do in our community, and I think a lot of the things that I have learned have been outside of the classroom, right? I was privileged in the sense that like I can travel and I can go to these different things, right? But sometimes it's just having conversations with the person down the street from you. Sometimes it's asking your aunt or your uncle or even your teacher about some of their life experiences because there's so much untapped information. So I think when you have those conversations, that is one of the most powerful things that you can do in this city because we are so lively. I think Baton Rouge definitely has a long way to go, but I think that we have the right people right now that are willing to have those conversations, willing to explore. Our Secretary of State's office and our tourism office, they're working on a Black civil rights trail for the state of Louisiana right now. So that's something that we're doing that's going to be so beautiful. Metromorphosis is doing, they have the guide that they're presenting to you guys, which will show you a lot about Baton Rouge that people didn't know. There's Lincoln Memorial Theater. There's Mercedes Museum. There's the Buddy Stewart Museum. There's all these beautiful historical Black things right here in our community. Malcolm X, Louis Armstrong, all these different random people stopped in Louisiana and right here in Baton Rouge, and those stories don't get told.
Thank you guys.
About telling the stories.
Thank you guys. So our next question is from Ms. Gamble's class at my alma mater, McKinley Senior High School, and they ask, do you think there will be equality or at least finding a middle ground and coexisting among all races, religion, and etc.? Or do you believe that there will always be some form of controversy that leads to hate and discrimination?
Maxine might disagree with me. I personally think yes, because if we even look at like one of the longest, like if we talk about like the historical impact, if we look at like Asian dynasties, right? They have golden ages and then they have years and periods of feuding and fighting, right? And it's all circulating around religion. And this was something like, this is like, centuries worth of that. So we're looking at that as any indicator and where they are currently, not to be a reflection of where they were, but this is something that like humans, like we naturally and organically find issues. We're just some problematic, we're just a problematic species. We just can't chill. So, while there always, I think, will be problems, it'll show up through sexism and show up through, racism. It'll show up in some way and manifest itself. But again, I think it's about what you individually do, the decisions that you make that say, I'm not going to contribute to that. I am going to speak and live differently. I am going to have expectations of my future children, of my family. When my family member says something that might be offensive to another community that doesn't look like mine, I'm going to say, wait, no, let's pause. Let's think about that. Let's have a conversation. Whether it be, comments that, might not be as, sympathetic to another community. I am going to honor and advocate for other communities, even though they don't directly impact me, because that's the right thing to do. Is to hold everybody accountable on a continuous basis, not just whether it's your friends, not if it's, your auntie, uncle. I'm holding everybody accountable. I checked my mama last night and she, she was like, oh, you're right. I didn't in a respectful manner, but like my mom, like everybody has, ways about them. So it's definitely about saying like, how are we doing our part? It's always about what part you're picking up and making sure that you're doing it on a continuous basis.
I don't disagree with you, Myra, that these things will always be with us. What I say will not always be with us is that limited access, because that is systemically structured. And to focus on ending those barriers is going to do a lot to make your individual world work well. The hate that you're talking about may be around, but it won't be able to limit your access and your movement through this country. So how the world operates is not on your shoulders to fix. As a citizen of this country, we the people means we get to say what kind of country we want to live in and what kind of access that can be open in this country. That's what we want to that's what I put my focus on, is educating people to know their power and how to be an active civic engaged citizen and know your power to make changes to have the kind of country you want. managing people is not my job, my interest, or my concern. Because as Myra said, those things are going to continue. That's not something that I think a young person should be putting their worry on, because it makes you feel unhappy and it makes you think it's your job to change it. It isn't. But your job is to focus on what kind of country you want to live in and do whatever you can do right where you are with what resources you have and what influence you have to make that difference. That will make you inspired, energized, and sometimes happy, a lot of times happy.
Well, I want to thank you both, Myra and Maxine, for inspiring us today with your wisdom. You both embody the spirit of beloved community and Sankofa in the way you live your lives. Let's take what we can from this dialogue and pass it on. We want to thank everyone for attending our first event today. We invite you to visit us at www.humanitiesamped.com to learn more about our ongoing work and sponsors. We give a special shout out to our partners at Metromorphosis and East Baton Rouge Fair School System for making this event possible. If you are a young person who wants to be a part of Humanities Amped, please go to the Get Involved page of our website, which is being dropped in the chat right now. We offer after-school programs that are all about your voice. Our motto is that young people are not problems to be solved, they are problem solvers. Teachers, visit our website to see how you can be involved in our educator learning community. We're working with our partners at EBR-PSS to amplify well-being, critical literacy, and civic-minded problem solving together every day. If you enjoyed this conversation, we will have another dialogue featuring a local civil rights legend and the first Black EBR school board member, Dr. Press Robinson, and former Southern University SGA president and current LSU graduate student, Anthony Kinney. Come back and join us at 11 a.m. Now we will take a break.